After nearly 90 years of life, it is time for new hands to lift the burden. It is in your hands now.
Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Nelson
Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Let us know that for each, the body, the mind, and the soul have been freed to fulfill themselves. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another and suffer the indignity of being killed. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunity.
Umuthulwa khawukudzinga abantwana behlala yasisentsana sobani na ezi. June 1976, a year to be remembered. Kusisankwethi ngulombhodamo yasiyimeme kabani na.
All right. Good morning, everyone, wherever you may be joining us, in the country, in the region, in the university, and anywhere else in the world. Welcome to the third youth convention hosted by the Nelson Mandela University through the Department of Student Governance and Development, and the whole Division of Student Affairs broadly. I must say that I'm excited for this year's convention, that as the university we've decided to host digitally, given the new developments that we operate under. And we have an exciting lineup of speakers today and tomorrow. We'll be running this convention over a period of 2 days. My name is Pedro Mzileni from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and I will be your facilitator today. And my whole approach basically today would be try to minimize myself as much as possible to allow the speakers to come through. So I have a very easy job to do this morning. The theme of today's convention, or this year's convention rather, is titled Young People as Agents of Their Own Collective Development. That is what we are going to be focusing on. And we have a very rich panel of speakers that will be coming through to look at these questions. And then obviously the most important stakeholder being you joining us, and we're looking forward to your robust engagement during the question and answer session. So let me also acknowledge the guests that are with us that I see in front of me. We have the director of MISTRA, Professor Joel Nechitenze. I call him Professor because he is one of the pioneering scholars of our current transition. And obviously our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, who has been leading us excellently during this pandemic. We can proudly say that as Mandela University, we did save lives and we will indeed finish the academic year. So thank you so much, Professor Mutwa, for the leadership that you have provided us. And then other guests and executive leadership from our university, the Dean of Students. I also see Laura Best from the VC's office is here with us. I also want to acknowledge the online SRC president, the e-president of Mandela, the first of its kind, Comrade Thembale Nyigilana. Thank you for joining us and your team. And basically everyone, colleagues who has joined us this morning, whichever university or whichever organization you might come from in the country, in the region, or all over the world, we welcome you in Nelson Mandela University. So, a big program right in front of me, and I don't want to waste any time. I want to get down to it very quickly. The first person that is on the program is our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa. She will be providing us with a welcoming address and set the tone for this annual youth convention, which is the third one that we are hosting as the university. And we bring it to you now through our digital platforms, because as a new generation university that we have chosen ourselves to be, we thought that it would be a gross injustice to have a platform of young people not taking place simply because the conditions have shifted. We strongly believe that young people are agile, they are flexible, and they are part of the innovative project that we are busy pursuing. And therefore, a convention of this kind had to take place using the new alternative platforms that have been provided by the conditions that we live under. Professor Sibongile Mutwa, without wasting any time, I want to give the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. This morning, what you did not say is that you are our former president of the SRC yourself before you rose to the ranks of the academy. So I'm really very, very proud of you, Pedro. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you at this third annual Nelson Mandela Youth Development Convention. And I do also want to thank our Dean of Students and his team for deciding not to call off the annual youth convention and to stay the course at this very difficult time. So I really appreciate that, because you do not want to lose momentum on something like as important as this initiative of the Mandela Youth Development Convention as an annual exercise. I greet the youth leadership that are here with us, including student leaders from different universities who are here already and those that might still be coming to the convention. I particularly want to greet our president of the SRC, Thembale Nyigilana, and the executive of the SRC that are in the meeting, that are going to be participating in the next 2 days. I would like to greet the senior management of the university. I understand that the DVCs are going to be participating in this event. In particular, I want to greet our Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack, under whose mentorship the convention resides. I want to greet our partners and our friends of our university, particularly a warm welcome to our guest speaker, a colleague of mine that we've worked together, a true intellectual, a true revolutionary, a friend and a comrade, Mr. Joel Netitsenze. I want to thank you, Put Joel, for availing yourself to come as you do all the time to teach in this initiative. Program Director, I think it is appropriate to begin with a brief reflection on the collective journey that we have traveled over the last 3 years since the launch of the annual Mandela Youth Development Convention as a flagship program of our university. In doing so, colleagues, I want to also acknowledge in his absence our patron of the annual youth convention, the President Kgalema Motlanthe, who associated his name with this initiative right from the beginning when it was very new. So I'm really very grateful for that. The convention was conceptualized as a generational and intergenerational dialogue on progress, challenges, opportunities, and strategies that need to be deployed to hasten the development of our young people. The convention's conceptual framework sets out the following broad outcomes, and I quote, "The work of the convention is expected to not only focus on short and simple solutions to the challenges, but it is projected to yield the following broad outcomes. Firstly, creation of a youth development index published annually. Its focus will be to reflect on progress made in evolving youth development in the country. Secondly, the establishment and sustenance of a youth research laboratory on youth development theory and praxis. The convention will achieve its objectives and outcomes through creating and sustaining an ecosystem of networks of organizations, private, public, and civic, and individuals that play in the youth development space. This network should be connected to youth and be activated to support the ideas and projects of young people aimed at their own development, and I close quote. So that was the intention at the founding year of this convention. The first convention in 2018 coincided with the centenary celebrations of the life and times of our namesake, Utata Utalipunga Nelson Mandela. It thus challenged young people to live out Madiba's legacy and connect the past and the present to their imagined futures. The second convention in 2019 looked at the 25 years of South African democratic governance through the lens of young people. Whilst acknowledging progress made, particularly on the policy front, there was common appreciation of the reality that young people remain significantly impacted by the major social challenges that face our society. The question thus remained for us: how do we make the next 25 years of democracy youth-centric? Clearly, we must search for alternative strategies and approaches in response to this question. It does not only call for a review of policy and practice on youth development, but a total shift or radical reorientation of our approach to it. At the core of the new approach should be the activation of young people as capable agents with willingness, with energy, with creativity, insights and foresight to lead their own development. This is the main task of this third convention, which we are starting today. The mainstay of this year's session, Program Director, is twofold. Firstly, agency development amidst turbulence and complexity. What capabilities and approaches do we need to fashion in order to accelerate the building of a socially just society? This being the main platform on which our university drives. I am looking forward to our keynote speaker today, Mr. Joel Netichenze, leading us and provoking our thinking about this and about what we ought to do to heighten our transformative programs, even in the period of massive disruptions, chiefly occasioned by COVID-19, coming on the heels of earlier radical changes in the Organization of Human Affairs as evidenced by phenomena such as the advent of the fourth industrial revolution. This is not even to mention the emergence of new nationalism, especially in certain parts of the north of the world, and the declining economy here at home. These are two very big developments that are facing us as we move forward in this year and going forward. These global and national realities have resulted in the deepening and sustenance of the vicious cycle of inequality and the deferment of a trajectory towards a more positive and virtuous cycle of development as envisioned in our own National Development Plan. The second intention of this invention is the creation of the Mandela Youth Development Labs and Commons. These are envisaged as generative spaces deliberately curated to reflect, learn, and create knowledge for action, and which continue beyond the next 2 days, which have been set aside for the annual session. When the Dean briefed me about this, I commended him and the team that this is a very courageous move, because we are treating this year's convention not simply as an event, but as a continuous initiative, which will have to make sure that we stay the course for these youth labs to be a success. The 2020 convention is to serve as the pivotal launch of a set of youth labs. The youth labs will be virtual and physical spaces designed to experiment with solutions to address the complex challenge of youth development. The youth labs will be spaces for creating innovative approaches to youth-centered and youth-led ways of addressing these challenges and developing kernels for fundamental systems change. The youth labs aim to achieve the following goals. Goal 1, enabling agency for social change in a society that is always emerging. Secondly, building youth leaders for a new society through youth-led learning and practical action. Thirdly, developing new approaches for addressing complex social problems facing young people in our country. Moving from the broad principles and guidelines above, therefore, the youth labs will be designed and established around 3 central imperatives: to learn, to connect, and to co-create. Initially, there will be 4 thematic labs, each exploring and tackling youth challenge for a period of a year. The 4 labs together form a knowledge commons as the 4 challenges are interconnected. The 4 thematic areas, therefore, are: firstly, youth entrepreneurship, youth education, with a particular focus on Africanization and decolonization. Thirdly, youth health and well-being. And finally, youth sustainability, with a focus on climate change, environment, and resource stewardship. Program Director, as I move to conclude, the period we find ourselves in requires courageous, bold, authentic, and exemplary leadership. Leadership in this context does not only refer to elected or administrative leaders, but it refers to a collective that generates, that propagates, articulates, and mobilizes sections or the whole of society around a set of novel and inspiring ideas that resonate with and are deeply connected to the development aspirations of society. So we need to ask continuously the so what question in everything that we do. We as Mandela University remain committed to cultivating a new generation of leaders who are ready to play their part in this ongoing journey to transform society. I do hope that the launch of Mandela Youth Labs will signal a critical milestone in sculpting young people who are critical thinkers, creatives, and innovators in a crusade to exploit transformative potential of education as an instrument to change the world. It is up to you as the young people of today to seize the moment to imagine new futures. I thank you and I wish you the very best in this convention in the next 2 days. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, our Vice Chancellor at Nelson Mandela University. I'm just acknowledging the people as they keep coming in. I see we also have a Member of Parliament, Mr. Floyd Shivambu with us. Good morning, sir. All right, let's move on with the program. We'd like to invite the SRC President, Comrade Thembalethu Nyikilana, to give a statement of solidarity and support on behalf of the student movement. President, over to you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Pedro. Allow me to take this time to greet colleagues,
I'm going to
the
check just now,
distinguished
Joe.
guests.
There's quite a few Facebook. Okay.
Allow me to greet colleagues, the distinguished guests who have joined us here today. Of course, having mentioned members of Parliament, Dr. Joel Neshitenza, our keynote speaker today, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, our Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Students, the Deputy Vice Chancellors, members of the Student Representative Council, as well as the guests, as well as the Nelson Mandela University students at large. I think it is indeed an honor for me to be here today to offer a message of support towards the third annual Youth Convention of the Nelson Mandela University. I think it is an honor as well as the famously known Student Representative Council, the so-called e-leadership of the university, to join in such a platform where our third annual youth convention is offered in such a platform due, of course, to the COVID-19 pandemic, which has forced us to adopt a new normal style of living, which encourages platforms such as these. Mine is not going to be long, Chair, like I said. It is, of course, an opportunity to come and offer a message of support. I'm particularly drawn towards the theme here today, which speaks about young people being the agents of their own change. It is rather unfortunate that we find ourselves in a pandemic that has exposed largely many other pandemics that we live with within the country at large. Pandemics such as social exclusion, social injustice, inequality, as well as poverty. But I think most importantly, it would be a huge injustice for me not to mention one of the largest pandemics that young people face, which is exclusion in many of the mainstream, such as employment, economic activity, as well as economic participation. Just yesterday, when we were celebrating the dropping down in our numbers as far as the COVID-19 outspread in the pandemic is concerned, we also found out that in the second quarter, South Africa suffered a 2.2 million job losses, which is an unemployment rate decrease that has dropped towards 23.3%, which is largely going to affect young people as well. And I hope that today, within our discussions as well as tomorrow, we'll also offer an opportunity for young people not only to reflect, how the old have once waged their own youth struggles, but also an opportunity for young people to reflect on how do we then move forward as young people with the current pandemics that we face as this generation. I'd like to say that it is not a mistake that Nelson Mandela University has adopted the theme that has been adopted by the country at large of saving the academic year whilst rescuing lives, that we continue to soldier on with some of our own programs, such as the Youth Convention, because we understand that beyond rescuing the academic year as well as saving lives, we too have a social responsibility of ensuring that we lead discussions that face the country as well as that face the general society at large, of discussing issues that are important to youth development at large. I want to congratulate the Office of the Dean of Students that have ensured that we have not postponed this particular youth convention. And I'd like to say that to the Office of the Dean of Students that may we continue both practically providing solutions towards youth development, as well as offering platforms such as these. I hope that the rest of the student population will join us as the day continues today and will continue to fruitfully engage in this message. I thank you.
All right, thank you so much, President, for that message. Just to emphasize, colleagues, that the comments and questions that you have, you may please post them on the chat box. We will also take time to read the comments and questions as well that are coming through from our social media accounts of the university. All right, we are moving swiftly with the program right on time. I would like now to call the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack, our Dean of Students in Mandela University, to introduce the keynote speaker. Over to you, Dean.
Thanks, Program Director. Good morning, Madam Vice Chancellor of our university, distinguished guests, participants to this third annual Mandela Youth Development Convention. My task is to, as indicated by the program director, is to introduce our guest speaker this morning, who has been mentioned by our Vice Chancellor in her address. Our guest speaker is Mr. Joel Nechitenze. He is the Executive Director and Deputy Chairperson of the Board of Governors of the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, popularly known as MISTRA. I must add that he is the co-founder of MISTRA. And I had an opportunity at the launch of MISTRA, of attending its launch. He holds a Master of Science in Financial Economics and a postgraduate diploma in Economic Principles from the University of London, as well as a diploma in political science from the Institute of Social Sciences in Moscow, Russia. Before his retirement in government in 2009, he served in President Mandela's office as the head of communications. He also served as the CEO of what is popularly known as GCIS, which is Government Communication and Information Services. He also served as the head of PICAS, which was known as the Policy Coordination and Advisory Services in the presidency under President Thabo Mbeki. He was amongst the first commissioners of the first National Planning Commission, which produced the National Development Plan in 2012. And he also currently serves as a non-executive director in the following boards, in the board of CSIR, NetBank Group, as well as Life Health Group. He has been a member of the NEC, National Executive Committee of the Governing Party, since 1991. That is the African National Congress. As the VC indicated earlier on, Mr. Netshitenzhe is one of the foremost thinkers that the country has produced. He is a strategist, he is an intellectual, and you will find his thinking, his ideas imprinted in most significant plans or strategies that the country has produced. As I mentioned earlier on, the National Development Plan. I can also mention, for instance, the South Africa scenarios. I'm not sure how many of us are aware of this, which was produced in 2008, 2025 South Africa scenarios, which had 3 scenarios. One was not yet Uhuru. The second scenario was Mubango. And the third scenario was Ngalagata. He recently also participated in the development of the 2030 scenarios, which were recently published, which were also presented by Dr. Somadoda Figeni at last year's convention, which is called Indlulamiti scenarios. And he has also been involved in the review of government performance, like putting together the 10-year review of government, the 15-year review, just to mention but the few. So as the VC said earlier on, we are truly privileged to have him as a main speaker at this year's convention. With the great work that he has done for the country, he remains one of the humblest servants that have met. And as some of us know, he also hails from the north of the country, that is from Limpopo. Over to you, Mr. Netshitenzhe. Thanks, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Facilitator Petro Mzileni, Vice Chancellor of the Nelson Mandela University. Should I call you colleague, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, and other leaders that are present. President of the SRC Njikilana, distinguished colleagues, and I will take all the protocols as observed because I cannot identify all of the attendees, and also hope that the signal will hold as It's a bit overcast here in Gauteng. Let me start off by thanking the Nelson Mandela University and its partners for the invitation to join you today. It is indeed an honor to take part in this 2020 Nelson Mandela Annual Youth Convention. I was asked to reflect on the development of agency amidst turbulence and complexity, as well as to look at the capabilities and approaches that are needed to build a just society. In doing so, I will try to find a synthesis between the temptation to sermonize to the youth and an attempt, on the other hand, to just posit ideas for debate. The truism, in my view, needs no emphasis that 2020 has brought out in the boldest relief possible the responsibility on all of us to develop the capacity to confront social challenges in a highly turbulent and complex environment. Now, the standard approach in dealing with a global pandemic such as COVID-19 is to ask questions such as, what are the leaders doing? And by leaders will be meaning the elderly. And are the youth in particular cooperating? In other words, a cultural ageism tends to inform our train of thought while we proclaim from the rooftops that the youth are leaders of tomorrow. I wish, as a starting point, to challenge this notion. In its strategy and tactics document adopted at the 54th National Conference, the ANC addresses the place and role of youth in society in the following way, and I quote, "A nation's success depends on its ability to encourage, harness, and incorporate into its endeavors the creativity, daring, and energy of youth. The tonic of youth resides in their capacity to be a lightning rod for positive disruptive change. Their impatience, militancy, and imprudence are a disadvantage if improperly deployed, but these attributes can also stand transforming society in good stead, especially during moments of inertia and excessive risk aversion." Implied in these assertions, in my view, is a critical assumption, which is fundamental to the posture that young people need to adopt in their own self-definition and in projecting themselves within society. It is for this reason that I proceed from the premise that youth are not just leaders of tomorrow, but leaders of today. To believe otherwise is to entrench amongst the youth a mindset of self-doubt, of timidity, of reticence to assume responsibility. It should be taken as a given that if society treats young people like immature children, they will behave indeed like children. They will as a default psychological state, act irresponsibly in the belief that some adults will clean up after them. In this way, we deprive ourselves of the elixir of youth, which adds energy and daring to the cause of human development. Let me elaborate briefly on why this starting point is important. We celebrate this month the legendary Steve Biko and the leadership role he played in a particular phase of struggle. As we do so, what we forget to underline is that already in his 20s, he was a leader of society, not just a leader of the youth, long before his murder by the apartheid police at the age of 30. There are many other such young trailblazers from South African and global experiences who emphatically confirm that youth are capable of being leaders of the age in which they live. I'll give just a few examples. Charlotte Maxeke, besides her academic achievement and community activism, was in her 30s when she defied traditional restrictions and imposed herself on a patriarchal gathering in 1912 where the ANC was lodged. Frantz Fanon wrote his many seminal works during his youth, and amongst the first of these, Black Skins, White Masks, was published when he was just 27. Isaac Newton developed his work on mathematical calculus at 23. Steve Jobs started Apple when he was 21. Siyabulela Xuza from your neck of the woods developed ideas on energy solutions at an early age, and he already has an asteroid named after him. Sol Plaatje was 35 years old when he assumed the position of the first ANC Secretary General in 1912, and by then he was already an accomplished author. Albert Einstein published the first of his theory of relativity, the first part, at the age of 26 in 1905. Karl Marx was 30 and Friedrich Engels was 28 when they, together with other activists, drafted the Communist Manifesto, one of the most seminal critiques of the capitalist system. I do hope the point is now made. And this is that young people are leaders of today, not just of tomorrow. Respect yourself and respect communities and the broader society in which you operate. Learn from formal education and through praxis, and make a mark today on our changing society. Yes, in the act of advancing social transformation, you will cause disruption. You will create discomfort in the existing order of things. You will also, from time to time, make mistakes. But what defines you should be the capacity to rise and dust yourselves up when you stumble, and constantly to aim for the stars. Now, before reflecting on how youth can act as a lightning rod for positive change, Let us examine some of the major indicators that characterize South Africa's youth today. I take it you are familiar with the fact that we're referring here to about 37% of the population aged about between 14 and 35 years. And I would say that, like most of the African continent, South Africa is still at that demographic phase characterized as the so-called youth bulge, with the potential of a demographic dividend, a kind of dividend that happens when the labor force grows more rapidly than those who are dependent on the economically active population. This then is meant to drive a society's productivity and improve its income. But a youth demographic bulge can turn into a curse if society is unable to ensure that young people are gainfully involved in income generating and other socially beneficial activities. South Africa faces the danger of missing that demographic dividend because we are unable optimally to utilize the brains and the brawn of our youth. The overwhelming majority, about 71% of the unemployed in our country, are young people. The labor force participation rate is 48% for the youth, compared to about 60% in the total population, and it continues to decline. We can refer to rates of HIV infection, experiences of crime and drug abuse, gender-based violence, and levels of poverty, and the situation appears quite grim and hopeless. However, as Statistics South Africa has demonstrated, young people have, since 1994, experienced an improving quality of life. This is reflected in general access to basic services, including literacy rates that are close to 100%. If we were to take tertiary education as an example, the number of enrolled students has almost doubled since 1994. And while African students constituted less than half of the student population then, this has increased to about 71% now. It is thus understandable that in spite of the difficulties that young people in South Africa face, they have consistently been shown in opinion surveys to be the most optimistic about the future than other sections of our population. More young people than any other demographic define themselves primarily as South Africans or Africans, as distinct from seeing themselves through the lens of ethnic, language, and other such narrow identities. Even if their levels of registration for elections may be lower, young people have evinced a willingness to use a variety of other platforms to take part in socio-political discourse and exercise their social agency. And so in the overall, we should acknowledge the weaknesses, but we should not lose sight of the macro social progress that has been made in changing South African society for the better, particularly for young people. Beyond access to basic services, this is also reflected in the changing social structure of the nation, with many Black people climbing up the social ladder. However, we also need to acknowledge challenges such as growing inequality, especially within the Black community, as large swaths of young people and women are left behind. Particularly concerning is the fact that since the turn of the past decade, that is in 2010, important indicators have shown pedestrian or negative trends. This applies to the rate of economic growth that has not equaled population growth in that period, income poverty that increased between 2011 and 2015, and the hollowing out of state capacity as a consequence of corruption and state capture. Gender-based violence has mushroomed into a scourge of epidemic proportions. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has today aggravated the situation, exposing the Achilles heels of our society and humanity at large. We are a global generation with sophisticated weapons and appliances. We celebrate advances in the fourth industrial revolution, including artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. We pride ourselves on the mastery of the tiniest particles through nanotechnology and the manipulation of natural phenomena through genetics and biotechnology. Our odysseys into space surpass everything imagined by previous generations. And yet, irony of ironies, a tiny virus has forced us to cower in terror, making us wonder about the fate of human civilization. We thus have to question the logic of a social system on a global scale that fails to direct resources on scientific inquiry towards protecting the global commons, towards solving the most critical human threats. We have to question the manner in which geopolitics is playing out today, threatening to rend humanity apart and precipitate a destructive global conflagration. And we have to develop a keener understanding of and confront two of the main defining features of the current global social system, and those features are growing inequality, and youth marginalization. Let us start off with social inequality. As aptly summarized by Oxfam, with 5 brief, shocking facts from its 2020 publication. One, the world's richest 1%, the billionaires, have more than twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people, which is about 90% of the world's population. While almost half of humanity lives on less than 5.5 US dollars a day. Two, almost 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue comes from taxes on wealth. And the super rich avoid as much as 30% of their tax liability. Three, today, 258 million children, that is 1 out of every 5, will not be allowed to go to school. And for every 100 boys of primary school age who are out of school, 121 girls are denied the right to education. For every day, 10,000 people die because they lack access to health care. And each year, 100 million people are forced into extreme poverty due to health care costs. And 5, and last, from that Oxfam list of facts, men own 50% of the world's wealth. That is 50% more of the world's wealth than women. And the 22 richest men in the world have more wealth than all the women in Africa. Now, the International Labour Organization had observed some time ago in its 2013 Global Wage Report that income earned by workers had for the past century been a constant share of national incomes. But this has changed. By 2014, real income for households in the lower part of the income distribution was in fact below that of 2005. That is, real incomes in 2014 for the working people were lower than their real incomes about 9 years earlier. The dynamic in the United States is even more dramatic in terms of, for instance, life expectancy. In 1970, blue-collar white workers in the United States trailed those of the same age in the higher income category by 5 years. Means they would on average die 5 years earlier. But the life expectancy gap is now in the region of 15 years. It means poor white blue-collar workers die 15 years earlier than the richer white part of the US population. In many parts of the world, the trend is even more concerning in relation to young people. Earlier, we referred to challenges faced by South African youth, and Peter Coy, in his article in Bloomberg Business Week in February 2011, demonstrated how the current global socio-economic system has spawned a phenomenon of youth marginalization, and I will quote him. In Tunisia, the young people who helped bring down a dictator are called Hittistes. That is French Arabic slang for those who lean against the wall. Their counterparts in Egypt, who on February 1 forced President Hosni Mubarak to say he won't stand for re-election, are called the Shabab Atilian, unemployed youth. The Hittistes and the Shabab have brothers and sisters across the globe. In Britain, they are the needs, that is not in employment, education, or training. In Japan, they are the freeters, an amalgam of the English word freelance and the German word Arbeiter, so freeters in Japan. Spaniards call them mileuristas, meaning they earn no more than 1,000 euros a month. In the US, they are called the boomerang kids, who move back home after college because they can't find work. Even fast-growing China, where labor shortages are more common than surpluses, has its ant tribe, recent college graduates who crowd together in cheap flats on the fringes of big cities because they can't find well-paying work. While the details differ from one nation to the next, the common element is failure, not just of young people to find a place in society, but of society itself to harness the energy, intelligence, and enthusiasm of the next generation. That is Peter Cole. There is no doubt that these stark realities have been multiplied manifold by COVID-19. And unless something drastic happens, this is bound to worsen social anomie across the globe. But it depends on what the youth and society at large do about this. Let us therefore come back to the relationship between the objective realities and the question of social agency. This is central to our discussion today. This relationship arises firstly because when the political leadership in many countries is unable to address these fundamental questions of political economy, they try to find scapegoats. They will blame radicals and rioters. They will invoke nationalism and protectionism. They will try to use sanctions as an instrument of industrial policy. They will target migrants and present them as the primary reason behind the nation's social woes. They will even use the fight against terrorism as a platform to corral their societies and other nations into senseless escapades. We all can see how these tactics of a contrived and skewed identity politics are playing out in the current spectacle that is the United States presidential election. Even those who proclaim a humanist social consciousness find themselves drawn into the quicksand, and they are unable to mobilize the working people and the poor on the central plank of decisive progressive social change. The second reason why these issues are critical for social agency is that the diversionary tactics of narrow identity politics, combined with poor strategic acumen, impact quite profoundly on young people. The youth are the ones mobilized as vigilantes to perpetrate violence against those who are of a different origin or do not look like them. They are the ones who are conscripted into military adventures that pit worker against worker across the globe on the basis of right-wing religiosity, whether it is Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, or even Buddhism. Young people are the ones who are mobilized to employ the shallow, inhuman, and vile ideology of racism and narrow nationalism, ahistoricism, and a misguided militancy that more often than not is used to mask the ideological bankruptcy, selfishness, and corruption of false revolutionaries who, as a rule of thumb, lead the youth to the marshes of defeat. Indeed, we refer to the issue of strategic acumen because, as in Egypt and perhaps even Tunisia, which Peter Coy cited, revolutionary sloganeering without appropriate strategy and tactics can in fact result in a social outcome far removed from the lofty objectives of the activists. These are just a few instances of situations in which youth social agency can be misdirected and where a revolutionary slogan actually can lead to the defeat of a revolution. The question, therefore, is whether humanity, and South Africans in particular, are skilled enough to face challenges of this nature. Herein resides the fundamental challenge about prudent exercise of social agency, informed by a firm grounding in science. Let us look at some of the areas where such agency can manifest, especially on the part of the youth. Quite clearly, tackling human challenges amidst turbulence and complexity cannot succeed in an environment of hyper-specialization in the production of knowledge. COVID-19 has again confirmed the maxim that natural sciences can only have optimal impact if they are undertaken in combination with humanities and social sciences and vice versa. We have learned over the past 6 to 9 months, for example, that the coronavirus cannot be tackled effectively without an understanding of health sciences, mathematical modeling, artificial intelligence, as well as an appreciation of polities, the political economy, and social psychology. And so, transdisciplinarity in education and research is critical as an underpinning to social agency. How then do we, in the context of decolonizing education, ensure that we deal not only with historical misrepresentation and native relevance, but also take the production, dissemination, and application of knowledge to new levels of intersectionality across and beyond disciplines and vistas of human achievement? That's a fundamental question. The current situation precipitated by COVID-19 may have worsened the complex macro-social dynamics that we have to manage. But like any other crisis, it also posits opportunities for intensified and focused efforts to attain social justice. The capacities that the youth and their institutions of learning command should stand society in good stead in identifying and operationalizing solutions to the current social challenges. This applies to programs that are being crafted to put the economy on a higher growth and development path. It applies to a conceptual understanding of the dynamics unfolding in the global economy, including offshoring, reshoring, and the shortening of supply lines, and how South Africa and all of sub-Saharan Africa can take advantage of the situation. It applies to the challenge of addressing the transition to a low carbon future in a manner that is just and inclusive. And it applies to the task of ensuring the widest possible social inclusion with women and youth, not just footnotes in the social compacts that are being crafted everywhere. Given that inequality is an equal opportunity disease that ultimately affects the poor and the rich alike, to paraphrase Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, the authors of the book titled The Spirit Level, Why Equality is Better for Everyone, what are the kinds of intervention that we should consider as part of the social compact for reconstruction and recovery, as part of the pursuit of social justice in the South African context? Critical in this regard is the fact that social cohesion depends not only on the reduction of absolute poverty, but also on reducing inequality or relative poverty. And in our society, in which social status is still defined according to the racial fault lines inherited from apartheid colonialism, this task is fundamental to nation building and the social cohesion that all of us cherish. Firstly, I think we will all agree that the pursuit of greater social equality cannot be likened to a desire to share poverty. In other words, as already emphasized, at the core of our endeavors should be the effort to grow the economy and create employment and other economic opportunities. In this regard, besides skills required in various economic and social establishments, we need to pose the question, does our education system sufficiently prepare young people themselves to become employers, to become entrepreneurs? This again foregrounds the issue of transdisciplinarity that we underlined earlier. Secondly, the broadest possible access to education and training is fundamental to promoting social justice. Armed with the necessary skills from universities and technical colleges, children of even the poorest of the poor are able to extricate themselves and their families from poverty, making education the great liberator. But there should be accorded return to educational effort, reflected in opportunities for employment and self-employment. Otherwise, we may end up merely creating an army of educated but unemployed young people. Thirdly, the social wage generally is critical in reducing inequality. In this regard, progressive taxation and the utilization of these resources to provide housing, electricity, water, refuse removal, roads, public transport, and other services demand that the state should act as an instrument of redistribution. But for the state to play that role, it has to be capable, and for it to persuade society to contribute the taxes necessary for such redistribution, it has to be ethical. Fourthly, the minimum wage is an important intervention to reduce income inequality. Combined with the social wage, this needs to be pegged at a level that increasingly guarantees all South Africans a decent quality of life. The fifth area in reducing inequality and promoting a socially just society pertains to opportunities for the poor to acquire meaningful assets that they can call their own. Besides housing, land, and other such assets, serious consideration should be given to employee share ownership schemes, profit sharing, and other such arrangements across the economy, thus ensuring that the beneficiaries of economic empowerment are not only the elites, but also ordinary workers. Lastly, programs to reduce inequality should also focus on the cost of living for the poor. Besides the high markups in South Africa's production markets, or rather South Africa's product markets, which is in part a consequence of levels of concentration of ownership and monopoly conduct, the democratic state should pay more attention to addressing the apartheid spatial inheritance, reflected in the distance between centers of economic opportunity and residential areas. Through transport subsidies and diversifying locations of economic activity, we will eliminate what is in fact an apartheid tax on the poor. Now, we posit all these proposals proceeding from the perspective that South Africa cannot rise from the quagmire of pedestrian growth and deepening inequality if we do not re-engineer the economic structure inherited from colonialism. It is a system that, without strong interventions, will tend towards reproducing inequality and thus entrenching the fault lines of race and class. In this regard, we should aim to construct social relations that combine the best attributes of social democracy, which has a strong redistributive character, and the positive elements of a developmental state that builds compacts amongst all social partners in pursuit of industrialization and modernization. All this in the context of the current age of the fourth industrial revolution, transition to a low carbon future, and the threat of diseases old and new. Social agency across the board, but especially amongst young people, should be directed at attaining these objectives. This should be inspired by an outlook to improve one's individual condition of life at the same time as each strives to contribute to the commons. Young professionals should strive to excel in whatever they do, proceeding from the understanding that Africa and Africans are capable of contributing the best to human civilization. Unlike before, today's generation of youth in South Africa has a frame of reference that is no longer an abstract wish in a distant horizon. The ideals of social justice and an ethical society are enshrined in the basic law of the land. Our task is to ensure that progressively and with the necessary speed and impatience, we turn those lofty ideals in the Constitution into lived experience on the part of the majority of the population. In my view, there is nothing in the objective environment that totally prevents young people from playing this role. But this demands a conscious attitude of mind to eschew a youth dependency, which is commonly reflected in the impulse to hang onto the coattails of the established leadership, and which finds expression in the tendency to present youth as victims rather than conscious actors in changing society for the better. This attitude of mind should also manifest, I think, in a deliberate self-criticism, which the young people must exercise, especially in the current situation of political incumbency, with ethics and value systems under serious strain. And as we all know, South Africa has experienced a terrible decade in terms of the direction of socio-economic development, as well as corruption and state capture. The youth has not been spared the malignant impact of these tendencies. Many young leaders in the political arena have fallen foul of ethical sensibility. Pursuing celebrity lifestyles, they live above their means and seek to accumulate wealth by fair means or foul. Even within the student movement, the resources that go with leadership positions have corrupted many young activists. The culture of impressing peers with material achievements and the use of social media to flaunt ill-gotten gains underline how money and decadent lifestyles are increasingly being associated with the privilege of leadership. Many young activists are being acculturated into a phenomenon that is inimical to the values of social justice. This, in my view, is one of the greatest dangers to the ability of young people to exercise social agency and their capacity to act as a lightning rod for positive change. And so my central message today is objective conditions and the country's development trajectory present opportunities for young people to act as leaders of today. There are many difficulties, but those who have access to these opportunities can help reconfigure the system and lift all of society onto a higher development trajectory. This can only succeed if young people broaden their knowledge base, if they pursue a transdisciplinary approach to the generation and dissemination of knowledge, if they are inspired by the humanism that defines our constitutional order, if their value systems are based on a strong ethical foundation, and if they continually learn by doing. Thus, in the manner of young Newton and Einstein, Marx and Engels, Maxeke and Plaatje, Biko and Fanon, young people of today shall become the lightning rod as humanity strives to manage turbulent and complex times. They shall optimally exercise the social agency required decisively to change stultified ideological and socio-economic paradigms. As Mandela said in the video that you were playing earlier, we should not allow the sun to set on so glorious a human achievement that is South African democracy and the progressive pursuit of social justice. In other words, perhaps even more than the outstanding young people of generations past, today's youth can excel in crafting the theories and in realizing the praxis that can lift South Africa, the rest of Africa, and humanity at large onto a higher trajectory of economic growth and development. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Chitenza. I think I have about 10 to 15 themes that I have recorded in front of me as we're now going to enter into the stage of the conversation. Very groundbreaking submissions, a critical questioning of our existing paradigms, the state of our transition, and also the overall duty of young people and so on. Yeah, but before we move on to the question and answer session, I have noted the questions that have also been posted in the chat box. I'm just going to request the floor to please take a break of 2 to 3 minutes, 3 minutes maximum, and then just to stretch our legs, go grab coffee, a glass of water or something to drink, just to stretch our legs. And then after 3 minutes, we will return to have a robust discussion with our guest speaker, Mr. Joel Nechitenza. I will see you in 3 minutes, colleagues. All right. Welcome back. We are still in the annual youth convention of Nelson Mandela University. Welcome back from the short break we had. We are now moving straight into the question and answer and conversation with the guest speaker, Mr. Joel Nechitenza. And I just want to quickly acknowledge two more guests who have just joined us. We have amongst us the president of SASCO, the South African Students Congress, Bamani Matiwane. And we also have the former SRC president of Wits University, Kefens Mkari, who is also now the founder and CEO of an entity called Makandeni, which is based in Gauteng. So welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Now, I just want to maybe kickstart this conversation. Firstly, if I can have, an informal chat with Mr. Joel Nechitenza quickly, just to pose something that has been bothering me as he was presenting, something that I have observed as well. And then afterwards, yeah, I will read the questions and answer that are in front of me. For me, I just have two things. Firstly, Mr. Nechitenza, I'm concerned about how our democratic government shaped the whole idea of human development post 94, right? Especially for Black people or the Black communities or the marginalized. For an example, the whole idea of economic transformation was anchored around having Black people, women, and people with disabilities entering the white economy, right? So you have executive boards, being opened up for Black people to come into them, right? Within the existing economy or the existing white institutions that we had, right? So you have big companies like Clicks, Standard Bank, all those oligopolies that I am mentioning. The whole concept of economic transformation was earmarked around having the boards, the senior management of these companies being occupied by Black people. And the major policy that was crafted to do this was the broad-based Black economic empowerment, right? So it has been the driving force, around this whole imagination of transformation of the economy. So we go to the top 100 JC companies, we go count the amount of Black faces we see there, the Black graduates whom we produce who go on and work for MTN and so on, we count them as the evidence of economic transformation. And there was no concerted effort to build new industries, new local industries in Black communities, new institutions owned by Black people so that they can employ their own young people, right? As a result, now what you see is Black young people, when they go through institutions of higher learning, there are no institutions in place to employ them. And the statistics released yesterday by Statistics South Africa, it shows that 10.9 million young people are outside of any form of training, education, or employment, right? And when you zoom those stats down into their racial categories, into their geographic categories, into their gendered categories, the picture is even more scary, right? So you have a particular racial category of people, which is white people living almost to full employment in South Africa. Their unemployment rate as a white race is below 4%. And then for the Black race, it is above 50, because the institutions that were established to run their economy remained in place. And economic transformation was earmarked as a way of driving Black people into these existing white companies instead of building new industries. Now, within this whole context existing, post-94 on came our fellow brothers and sisters from the African continent, right? Because the way capital destroyed Southern Africa and it destroyed the African continent as a whole, it left South Africa as the only territory that was stable. And as a result, a lot of our African brothers migrated into South Africa, of which they had every right to do so, because the post-1994 era opened up opportunities for everybody. It was an open economy for anyone to exploit opportunities that offered them. But now the African continent came into South Africa to search for opportunities within an environment where the Black marginalized has suffered centuries of colonization, and post-94, no effort was done to build the local industries, the industries needed in these Black communities to unleash these economic opportunities for this specific population group. So how then today would you apply your mind around these questions, right? An economy that is white-owned, where all wealth is concentrated in white hands, and then the remaining economy, the little that is left, is now up for competition by everybody across borders within the urban areas of South Africa. And then you have a policy approach that still looks at transformation as a way of just having these Black people in these existing white companies instead of building the new industries. So the whole protest around Clicks, for an example, right? Clicks was not going to bother Black people had there been other retail supermarkets established by our own people who sell the very same products that Clicks is selling, but we just stick with the Clicks as the only company that is there that can sell, you know, Vaseline to all of us in the country, which puzzles me. So, what is your view on how economic transformation was approached post '94 by the democratic government, and the problems that we face now? Do you think they're as a result of the wrong choices that we made around the economy as far as Black people's interests are concerned? I just want to hear your thoughts, Mr. Nachitenza, around that.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as possible because your question is all encompassing. Just to start off by making the point that with the advent of democracy, we had to adopt, let me call them macro social policies that would ensure the restructuring of society as a whole, whether it be in the economy, whether it would be in relation to, as I was saying in my presentation, the state as an instrument of redistribution. Indeed, I think in terms of macro social transformation, we need a combination of everything. Referring to the state as an instrument of redistribution, I think there are a few things that we can be very proud of. I referred in the presentation to education, to health, access to water, electricity, and so on. It might be that there are sometimes problems of quality. You lay down the pipes, but sometimes water doesn't come out. But that level of redistribution, which was possible because of progressive taxation, did happen over the years. One can quote many, many figures. I used, for instance, the issue of access to higher education. With regard to the economy, of course, we had to start with stabilization, given the mess that we had inherited, and we had to introduce macroeconomic policies that would ensure that there is macroeconomic stability. But by the turn of the century 2000s, those macroeconomic policies, gear that some people saw it, had achieved their purpose. That is why microeconomic interventions were possible. And we had a rate of growth close to 5-6% for many years, especially between 2002 and 2008. What about Black economic empowerment? We started off calling it Black economic empowerment. We now call it broad-based Black economic empowerment. And there is logic behind that, because the issue that you are referring to of access only by the elites seemed to be the outcome of that approach. And when we said broad-based, we were saying workers need to benefit. That is why one is even making proposals about employee share ownership schemes, profit sharing, and so on, which should become part of Black economic empowerment. And as you know, we have now broadened this to also include Black industrialists. I also pose the question, which is implied in your observation, about whether our education is geared to teaching young people not merely to become employees, but themselves to create employment. Is there sufficient economics education from the lowest level in basic education to ensure that young people are able to establish their own companies. There is also related to this a broader conceptual issue, and I'll go into a bit of an advertisement in this regard. There is a book that as the Mapungubwe Institute, we published at the beginning of this year, and this is about tenderpreneurship and the history of Black entrepreneurship. One of the major observations that one of the researchers makes there is that, yes, if you go to Malaysia, you'll find that there was economic empowerment. You'll find it in South Korea and other developmental states. But their approach was, first and foremost, this is the industrial strategy that we are adopting, and we will then use Malaysians and South Koreans as the entrepreneurs, which will ensure the success of the industrial programs that we are introducing. That is how the chaebolts in South Korea emerged. All of us know about LG, we know about Hyundai, because that government said, as they were introducing their empowerment policies, we will use locals as the lightning rod of those industrialization policies. In South Africa, I think you are correct to say we focused mainly on access to established businesses, rather than saying, in terms of our industrial policies, yes, there should be access to established business, but we should use Black industrialists as the linchpin of our industrial policies. And one does hope that what has been initiated now will be intensified going forward. You also referred to our African brothers and sisters and migration into South Africa. One can go on and on about the challenges that this presents, especially in the sense that it leads to competition in especially poor areas. But let me emphasize a fundamental question. And this is that South Africa cannot succeed as an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty in sub-Saharan Africa. We won't be able to establish walls or fences high enough and with sufficient voltage to prevent migration if the rest of our African brothers and sisters are living in poverty and are living in polities that are repressive. And so the question is, what role should we play in stabilizing sub-Saharan Africa, as we are trying to do in the Congo, Burundi, and other places? But in addition to that, how do we ensure that in our empowerment policies, the classifications also take into account local Blacks as well as Blacks from other parts of Africa, with emphasis on South Africans? You referred to cliques, and I think arising out of that are many lessons. I'll just quote one of them. You can talk about a solution that results in distribution of PPEs and this and the other. But I think an important approach with cliques and with Unilever would be, to what extent are you procuring your products from South Africa and from Black companies? That would then be part of longer term transformation. That's how I would respond to some of the issues you have raised.
All right, thank you so much. Let me now go to the comment section, Mr. Nechitenze. There's quite a number of very interesting questions here for you. Let me read the first one. The first one comes from Kefense Mkari, and it says, how can young people curb the challenge of interference by the elders in their socio-political system and organizations that are meant to amplify their voices and enhance their bargaining power in advocating and advancing their own consolidated interests, right? This question is inspired by the latest developments taking place in the ANC Youth League, which have resulted in young people betraying a generational mission they have defined for themselves, which is economic freedom in our lifetime, right? How can young people curb, therefore, the challenge of interference by elders in their organization? Mr. Nechitenze?
Thank you very, very much. I did make the point in my presentation that one of the major challenges that we face in politics, especially, is the tendency amongst young people to want to hang on to the coattails of the established leadership. You will see that I use as the active participant there, the actor, the young people who seek to hang on to the coattails of the established leadership. Yes, there will be attempts by the older generation to try and influence things in the youth league and other such structures. But the very theme of our discussion today is about social agency. And social agency is not given. Social agency is claimed and acquired by social agents. And I would characterize young people who want to fulfill their generational mission as those social agents who should not go around seeking for permission from anyone for them to be able to play their role. This tendency of wanting to hang on to the coattails is not unrelated to the challenge of ethics that I referred to earlier, because sometimes some of the unethical leaders then want to use resources in order to keep young people under their armpit. Young people with social agency should reject that. They should identify the challenges that are faced by youth. They should identify the challenges that are faced by society. And they should then say, this is the intervention that we want to make. In a sense, I would argue that what I call the hashtags, the Fist Must Fall movement, was one good example of young people exercising their agency. And they did not ask for permission from anyone. And indeed, there were successes from that movement. Mistakes might have been made along the way, but you were able to fulfill part of your historic mission by taking the initiative and not asking for permission. I do not quite understand why young people in the ANC want to ask for permission in order for them to play their role in renewing and revitalizing the ANC. The Mandelas and the Lembedes and the Sobukwe didn't ask for permission from the ANC when they developed relevant theories about the creed of African nationalism and so on, and when they ensured that by 1949, the ANC was regenerated. And the same tools should apply to youth of today. Don't ask for permission, claim your role.
All right. I'm just going to read the next two questions concurrently. The first one is from Anele Lotto. We have just retrieved it from Facebook. And it says, well, the key question since 94 is around economic transformation. The ANC has not made an intentional effort to promote new forms of Black business. Economic transformation should be intentional to recreate new forms of economic opportunities for the new class of Black business, okay? And then, let me also read the next one. Maybe you could combine the two when you come back, Mr. Nechitenze. The next one is, young people do not find the public service as an employer of choice. Why is that? What kind of incentives can be institutionalized in the public service to inspire young people to swell the ranks in that sector? I'm asking this question because one of the major stumbling blocks in the professionalization of public service is that there is a lack of appropriate skills and high reliance on consultants in the public sector, when in fact the state spends a lot of money in funding the education of its own citizens from ECD up to postgraduate studies. But it will seem that we are doing this for the exploitation of corporate private sector, whilst the public sector is perceived as plan B. Even more worrying is that the state must again pay huge sums of money to these consulting companies to access the very same young people it has educated and trained. Yeah, so I think it is around the acquisition of young talent for the public service to make it more effective and efficient. And probably also this speaks to the mediocre deployment policies of the governing party, whereby we find people in managerial positions in government without the required experience and skills to execute that kind of tasks for the benefit of communities. And as a result, consultants, as the Auditor General reports every year, get to be employed and get paid huge sums of money to do basic primary functions of governance that should have been performed by the very same people that the government put there. So yeah, I think those two questions, one on the post-94 economic transformation, and then the one on the professionalization of public service and its acquisition of young talent. Just those two, Mr. Nechitenze.
Thank you. I think with regard to the first one about economic transformation and new class of, let's call them Black capitalists, it's the issue that we were addressing earlier, in the sense that, as we were saying, with developmental states like Malaysia and South Korea, you could even say with China and Japan, there was a deliberate effort to say, first and foremost, this is our industrial strategy. Secondly, let's identify the people within our country with the capacity and the drive to become the implementers of that industrial strategy at the level of entrepreneurship. And that is how all these major and globally famous companies emerged. from Nissan to Toyota to LG and all the others, because they encouraged the emergence of local entrepreneurs as instruments, if you like, of the implementation of their industrial strategy. We failed in that regard, but now that we're talking about a recovery and reconstruction plan, one does hope that there will be greater emphasis on that in line with the program of establishing Black industrialists. Yes, of course, it is correct to blame these weaknesses mainly on government, but I think there should also be self-critique amongst Black business people and aspirant entrepreneurs. If you were to say, and perhaps this is not the most comfortable example to use, here is an opportunity for the procurement of PPEs in the context of COVID. What will many of our Black entrepreneurs do? Instead of saying, can we establish an enterprise that will produce face masks and other forms of PPEs, an enterprise that can produce sanitizers and so on? The tendency amongst Black entrepreneurs, many of them, not all of them, will be, can one take a trip to China to import the cheapest ones and then sell them to government with a high markup? And so the mindset, the paradigm amongst the entrepreneurs themselves is a problem that needs to be addressed, so that we become manufacturers of the things that are required within our society. I should acknowledge, I've seen from reports, there are many such entrepreneurs that have emerged who do the manufacturing rather than just importing things from China. One could pose a similar question. We're talking to you in the universities and the new forms of teaching that have to take place with hundreds of thousands of computers and other equipment that are required. Why should these computers and all these gadgets be imported? If we are going to need hundreds of thousands and in many years to come, millions of them, why don't we establish manufacturing capacity within South Africa? And to the extent that we might not have the skills and the sub-components, then Black entrepreneurs can partner with others from East Asia, from China, and from other parts of the world. That's another issue that we need to look at. Young people and the public service, I would agree fully with that. I think the trend since 1994 had been for many young people to see the public service as an employer of choice. The fact that today, in terms of transformation, the public sector, whether it will be with Black people, with women, with people with disability, the public sector is far ahead of the private sector, is precisely because many young people saw the public service as an employer of choice. Someone was telling me, for instance, with such departments as DTIC, as well as DPE, many young people would say, yes, we'll complete our studies. We will even go abroad to get experience in the multinationals. But before we reestablish ourselves in the private sector, I want to give 5 years of my life to the Department of Public Enterprises so that I can contribute what one can refer to as public service, but also improve my CV so that when I go back to the private sector, I can say I've got experience both in the public and private sectors. What is required is that those tendencies that especially established themselves in the past 10 years of employing people just from your village, of the people that you know, those bad practices should be eliminated, and we ensure that we employ people with the necessary skills. Thanks.
All right. Let me now go to the last two phases of questions, Mr. Nechitenze. So I'm going to present the second last phase, and then present the last one, and then we set you free. All right. There's a question coming from our social media accounts again, from Numalo Loto. The question, Mr. Nechitenze, is around the crisis of social reproduction, right? And Numalo is asking us to pay close attention to how capital has behaved in South Africa post-94 and the realities that it has presented us with. For an example, the levels of unemployment and poverty continue to increase. The levels of inequality also continue to increase. And if you look at these percentages in terms of how they affect specific people, they are very racialized, they're also very geographic, right? And as a result, he says, this also destroys young people's confidence in education, because they go through the systems of learning and higher education, and then they end up being unemployed once again. So they go back to the very same communities that they are struggling with. So the question of social reproduction, Mr. Nechitenze, that's the first one from Numalo. And then on the chat box, there's another one very much related to the one that I have just read. This one says, very key and fundamental observations by Keita Joel Nechitenze, especially when it touches on young activists and student leaders. He speaks about the problem of instant gratification for material acquisition, right? And where corruption is seen as a shortcut to having dignified livelihoods, basically. I think, Mr. Nechitenze, this speaks to what you touched on earlier on, about the usage of leadership structures by young people, by student leaders and so on, for quick gain, for impressing their peers, as you indicated, basically the whole paradigm of accumulation. So they are basically making comments around that, but get to imbibe those two together. I think the fundamental central question is around social reproduction. How do you negotiate those realities in light of what you have provided us in the context of South Africa?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the questions are interrelated. Crisis of social reproduction, I would agree with that observation. In fact, one of the major challenges, if we were to do a critique of the evolution of the South African social system since 1994, is the tendency within this system to reproduce inequality and to some extent poverty. Yes, there are many improvements that we have made in terms of the state as an instrument of redistribution, many improvements in terms of access to social services, but we are not breaking those essential elements of the social system that we inherited. And that social system is premised on what one can refer to as colonial capitalism. Colonial capitalism would have as amongst its attributes very strong and very powerful monopolies. Colonial capitalism will have as amongst its attributes the tendency to exclude the colonized. Colonial capitalism will have as amongst its attributes a dependency in relation to the developed economies of the North. We have not done enough in changing those elements of what we have inherited. And the solutions would be the things that I referred to in the presentation about how to deal with inequality, skills, high rates of growth, employee share ownership schemes, encouraging the emergence of new entrepreneurs, and so on and so forth. Related to this is the issue that has been raised about what I can refer to as return to educational effort. There is an interesting study that has been done by the World Bank, the division dealing with Latin America, where they make this observation. If there is no good return to educational effort amongst the poor, then young people will be discouraged from pursuing education. And this is one of the things that we need to address very seriously. Are we creating opportunities for the young people that emerge from school, from tertiary institutions, including vocational education? That's one of the things that we need to address. And related to this, I think it's a lesson that we can learn from the German system, where there is close cooperation between the vocational colleges and the enterprises, so that by the time young people emerge from these colleges, they have skills that are readily usable in the enterprises where they would be located. But one also needs to make the point that for young people, activism should not end when you leave the campus. The young people who have joined even the established enterprises should include their, or rather should continue with their activism in those enterprises to ensure that the culture changes, to ensure that transformation happens. And those Blacks who are in the management structures as well as on the boards of these institutions should continue with their activism in these institutions. Would cliques have happened if those on the management of cliques, of the suppliers to cliques, if those on the boards of cliques as well as the suppliers to cliques had continued with their activism? That's one of the issues that we need to keep in mind. The issue about instant gratification, I fully agree with. That's the point I was trying to emphasize. Not that people should not strive to improve their quality of life, but we should do it in an ethical manner. We should do it in a manner that we do not become so dependent that we then keep quiet when we see wrong things happening. What we also need to address at a conceptual level is the question about class formation in a post-colonial society. I'm raising this because it's a matter that Frantz Fanon has addressed, and I should, again, as an advert, indicate that the book on tenderpreneurship that we published as Mistra, as well as another one that will be releasing soon on what is called democratic consolidation in post-colonial societies, is something that needs to be looked at because we can derive many lessons from that. The latter, the one that talks about democratic consolidation, uses case studies of Mozambique, Algeria, India, and South Africa on what we can learn with class formation and democratic consolidation in post-colonial societies. Because there will be both positive and negative tendencies when you are forming, if you like, or when there is the emergence of a new capitalist class in a post-colonial environment. The question is how you harness the positive rather than the negative energies. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Nechitenze. We now come to the last phase of the questions. So I'm going to read all the remaining questions together. So maybe if you could maybe list them and then answer each one as a way of also giving your closing remarks as well. So the first one is from Sif Hesidal. It says, hello and thanks for an excellent talk. You speak of the importance of a just transition to a carbon neutral economy as one of the core tasks of today. How does that reconcile with a continued growth agenda? What is your view, for an example, around other ideas such as Kate Raworth's donut economies? So that is the first one. I hope you got it. The second one is, I agree, we as Black entrepreneurs and industrialists are not patriotic. We are also not collaborative in our efforts. We are very competitive amongst each other. Another challenge is the funding schemes and policies for SMEs. They are not as progressive and as efficient as they should be. Applying for funding a small business is very tedious and frustrating in this country. We also lack incubators for business development purposes. This is something we must address. I think this one, Comrade Joel, also speaks to the current architecture of our financial institutions in the country, right? Because if you look at them on how they provide credit to businesses, they are still orientated towards providing credit and support to the mining energy complex industries of our country, right? They do not at all see value in investing in small businesses that are started by our local communities where they come from, right? And I have never seen any economy of our size that grows without a vibrant small business sector. But the people who hold power to provide credit for people to start businesses are the big banks who do not see value in investing in such things. Rather, they provide that kind of a support to the established big supermarket value chains, the mining industry and the energy industry of our country. So from my side, just a question to supplement this one that is coming through from Kari is, do you think it is not the time now to have a state bank that will provide women's small businesses with enough credit to grow, young people's businesses to begin and grow, provide that support to them at a very affordable credit so that they go out there and establish themselves in a very tough economic environment, because given our history and the way our economy has behaved post 94, not every young Black person with a brilliant idea has capital available to start their own businesses. So shouldn't a state bank therefore come in as a key role player in this kind of a monopolized economy to provide these credits, to provide these affordable capital to these enthusiastic young people and women to start their own businesses? So that's just the second one to supplement that. And then maybe if I could provide also the last question. The theme of our convention this year, which is the one we have now, is around inspiring young people to be the champions of their own development. And in your address earlier on, you spoke about the likes of Anton Lembede, Oliver Tambo, the previous generation of the 40s and the 50s that led us to be where we are today in the current epoch. But if you look at that generation, right, for an example, you take someone like Anton Lembede. Lembede studied a variety of disciplines, right? And by the time he passed away, I think at the age of 30 or 31, he was already on his way to pursue a doctorate, right? He had already written a book. He pursued law. I think he was also found in the space of medicine and literature and so on. But he also had, a passion to lead a revolution for the emancipation of his own generation, right? You look at Oliver Tambo as well, brilliant scholar, comes from the background of physics and mathematics, but also went out of his way to be a very eloquent leader of our revolution. And if you read his addresses, Oliver Tambo's addresses, I mean, the man just epitomized excellence in every area of discipline that he touched on, even things that he didn't study, So obviously that kind of brilliance from that generation does not come by accident. It comes from a particular set of values that they had within themselves to drive themselves, to have the passion to go out and hunt for more knowledge, for more assets, for more resources to empower themselves and also empower those around them. I totally do not believe that the quality of leaders they became was because there was a particular mentor that spoon-fed them or whatever, but rather there was just, I'm sure, a conducive environment that was created for them, to fly off by themselves and become the best that they became from their own inspiration, where they championed their own development to be the kind of people they were. So my question is, in the current generation, where do you think are we lacking on that? What is lacking exactly from making our young people become the champions of their own development? Because from everything that you've mentioned, my conclusion is that if we want to have the future we envision for ourselves of economic freedom, we need to stop being lazy as Black young people. We need to go out there and build these institutions we need to build for ourselves. There is no government, there is nobody else who is going to come and do that kind of work. We have to labor, we have to break our backs to build those kind of institutions, because the generation coming behind us, no one is going to employ them, no one is going to ensure their economic emancipation unless there are institutions created for us to absorb them, right? The Indian race, the white race, all groups of people that you look across the length and breadth of this continent, their communities are flourishing today because institutions were built to absorb their talents, right? So those are the 3-4 last concluding questions to you, Mr. Nachitenze. So please come through for us as you also provide your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Starting off with the issue of a just transition, perhaps the point just needs to be made that the transition is both necessary and inevitable. We have to move towards finding new sources of energy that will not worsen the challenge of global warming that we are currently experiencing. The question then is, how do we ensure that that transition is just? One can go into all kinds of detail, but I will just use a few examples. The first one is at a macro level. And this is that the utilization of green technologies does create jobs, both at the stage of the construction of these entities, but also in the servicing of the entities once they start operating. Further to that, there are multitude of jobs that will be attached to the servicing of both the generators of green energy as well as in the transmission and usages, both in enterprises and in the homes. The issue is, as you undertake that transition, how do you ensure that those who are employed, for instance, in the coal generation plants, are retrained and are provided with the necessary skills to participate in the new technologies? But further to that, I've seen some studies that have been done that as you are talking about decarbonization, especially in Mpumalanga, there is the possibility of establishing green generation technology in Mpumalanga itself. There is no reason why we should not go into detailed studies about the possibility of having wind, solar, and other forms of generation in those areas where you have the coal-fired power stations. By the way, further to that, if we are talking about in a planned and gradual manner, reducing the utilization of coal, you could do that at the same time as you are increasing the utilization of other minerals that we have that are attached to green technologies. Part of the research work that we're doing at the Mapungubwe Institute relates to platinum group metals and the hydrogen economy. Hydrogen economy being where you use hydrogen as the source of energy, both for mobile applications in terms of cars as well as trains and so on. And others are starting to use these technologies in South Korea, in China, in Europe, and elsewhere. And the byproduct of fuel cell technology that uses hydrogen is water vapor, not noxious gases. And South Africa has got about 80% of the world's reserves of platinum. How do we ensure that we use this platinum that we have in abundance and become part of the leaders in the emergence of the hydrogen economy and fuel cell technology. Critical element in all this is that all this needs to be undertaken in consultations amongst all the social partners. Second issue about funding and incubators, I agree fully with that. The issue here is about banking, as you have said, and the big monopolies that we have. And the question is whether we can ensure not only the emergence of a state bank, but you might want to see to the emergence of banks that address various sectors of the economy. There's already the land bank, but do we want to have a bank that focuses, for instance, on the emergence of these new technologies that we're talking about? A bank that focuses on green technologies, on platinum group metals and fuel cell technology and the hydrogen economy. How do we ensure that development finance institutions are capacitated, are funded in such a way that they do not find themselves operating more or less like commercial banks, but also have got as an orientation the responsibility to ensure not just infrastructure development, but also the emergence of Black industrialists. How do we assess the existence in South Africa of venture capital? And why are we weak in this regard? How can we improve in that area? How about the mechanism of crowdfunding when there are creative ideas that emerge? But the point that I'm trying to emphasize is that we need to look at various possibilities insofar as funding is concerned to ensure that good, great ideas, especially from young Black entrepreneurs, are able to access the resources that they need for them to establish themselves. But I should add, in addition to all this, it's a challenge to break what I would refer to as the old boys club. You see, there are many Black industrialists that are being set up, and where I'm working, we have been interacting with some of them. One of them is producing cables that would be required in such institutions, in such enterprises as Eskom and the mining companies and so on. And you then come to discover, even if these large enterprises that can absorb the products from these Black industrialists have a policy of empowering Black people, but you have an old boys club in the procurement of an Anglo-American where they relate and deal only with those with whom they were at school and are not able to accept the emergent industrialists. How do you break that chain of an old boys club in the procurement sphere, both in the state-owned enterprises and the large established businesses? That's another area that requires addressing. I agree fully with you with regard to the issue of youth social agency and transdisciplinarity, which is a matter that I was trying to emphasize. You have referred to Lembede, and my hero in this regard is Oliver Tambo, a mathematician, a musician, a lawyer, and a strategist in politics. And this arose both from formal education, but also the thirst for lifelong learning. Because as young people, we should not say, I've completed my degree, I've completed my master's, my doctorate, and I put books aside. Now is the time to make money. We should have that attitude that on a lifelong basis, we should be learning something new. And by the way, learning relates not only to reading works by others, but also from writing. That is why I should say I was particularly impressed by young people such as Mpofu and the young Chikane, who have written books about their experiences in the Fees Must Fall movement. And in that way, like the youth of old, they are contributing to new thinking, to new experiences in society. Learning should be a lifelong process, but what one needs to emphasize is that those leaders of old, the Lembedes, the Tambos, the Bikos, the Fanons, and others, succeeded because they understood their mission. They understood the contributions that they needed to make to society. They tried to perfect their knowledge on a continuous basis, but over and above that, they sought to serve the poorest of the poor and change the socio-economic environment in which they were operating. Fundamentally, they were also guided by ethical conduct. These are the attributes that young people of today need for you to become not just leaders of tomorrow, but leaders of today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to interact and for the very good questions that you posed, which also helps with my own lifelong learning. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Joel Nechitenze. If we were at Sports Center, we would have a standing ovation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. We really, really appreciate it. Colleagues, I'm sure there's a lot to take home, and good luck to whoever will be writing the report of this whole exercise that we have imbibed this morning from all our speakers, especially Mr. Joel Nechitenze. Colleagues, we are now drawing closer and closer to the conclusion of day one. But before I move on to the last item, I want to invite first Siv Hesjedal to provide us with a preview or a synopsis of what to expect for day two, which is tomorrow, same time, same place. So she's gonna give us a preview or a synopsis of tomorrow, and then immediately after she provides a preview, we will invite the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack, to then provide the summation of today and the closing remarks, and then that will be the end of today's session. Without wasting any time, over to you, Siv.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you for your excellent work today, and thank you very much to Joel Nechitenze for his talk as well. Indeed, very, very, very stimulating. Just a few words about tomorrow. The Vice Chancellor, when she spoke this morning, she mentioned the concept of labs, of youth labs, and the idea that the objectives behind this convention need to be taken beyond the day, the day of the days that we set aside for the convention, and that we are together normally in the Sports Center, this year online. So we've been working together with the university to put together an idea of a set of sort of social labs or youth labs. And tomorrow we're going to spend time to deepen the concept, to deepen the design, and really invite participants to co-create the design of what these labs are. So we'll speak more about it tomorrow. But I think the idea of labs, because it might sound quite weird, you know, what do you mean by a laboratory? We'll talk more about that tomorrow, but I think the idea of youth labs or of social labs really picks up on some of the key concepts, some of the key words that came through in both the Vice Chancellor when she spoke this morning and Professor Nachitensha as well. One thing is that projects, programs, and interventions are not really sufficient for social change. So a lot of the questions that came out was like, government hasn't done enough about this, we don't have enough of this, and so on. Maybe another way to ask that question is, are the way we're designing these projects and programs, does it really lead to social change? What are the ways in which we actually can drive and enable transformation? We all know that, you know, putting in place interventions is not enough. The second thing is obviously the issue of ethics and values as a basis for a changing society. So how do we craft social agency and ways of acting based on ethics and values? I think the other key issue that was brought up was the issue of, and this has been a thread, I think, through the previous two conventions as well, need to broaden our knowledge base, and particularly transdisciplinarity, the intersection of natural science, technology, the human and social sciences for changing society and for a changing society. So that's really what these laboratories are about. And it's about creating spaces for expertise, students, practitioners, and so on to come together from the natural sciences, maybe from technology, from the media side, from human and social sciences, to deal with these kind of intractable, complex issues that are facing young people. And I think very importantly, as was said, not as leaders of tomorrow, but as leaders of today. I think the other key concept is the issue of learning by doing. I mean, labs are really around learning by doing, and it's also about socializing or democratizing the crafting of solutions, so that solutions or changing of systems are not something that, you know, must be outsourced in a way to policymakers. It's something that has got to be active and it's got to be done by people. So really that's what social labs are about learning, connecting, and creating. So we're going to hear more about that tomorrow. And really we really ask that you stay with us, and those that were not able to join today, that they are able to join us tomorrow. It's going to be a bit more participatory, so it's not going to be a streaming session. It's going to be a Zoom meeting style. So it means you can be able to talk with your cameras, with your voices, as well as on the chat, as we deepen this and we look at ways in which the university and its sort of broader ecosystem can work together with young people, students, and others to not just create solutions, but also to try to drive and enable change in the systems that continue to recreate, you know, challenges and problems for young people, which all were very well outlined in the talk today. I think the key thing, change is not about projects, and these labs, the idea is about really a way of being, and quite importantly, praxis, which again, Mr. Nachitensha spoke about. So please join us tomorrow. The organizers are going to send out another link, because it's not streaming, it's a meeting. There's going to be a new link, so please join us from 9 o'clock for a couple of hours to have an active session tomorrow. Thank you.
Great, lovely. Thank you so much, Siv. Yeah, hopefully tomorrow at 9 a.m. colleagues join us for those intimate discussions we'll be having on those branch rooms we will have around those themes. All right. Let me invite, therefore, our Dean of Students, Mr. Lutano Jack, to provide us with the golden thread of today's discussions, and also the general summation as we move on to day 2 tomorrow. Dean, over to you.
Thanks so much, Pedro. I think Siv has partly done my job, especially in relation to how today flows into tomorrow. How we designed the program, it was such that today's input, which was able delivered by Ukatu, it was to serve as a theoretical, if you like, as a theoretical foundation for tomorrow's session, because tomorrow's session will be basically then will be about agenda setting and putting agency into action. And I think today's session has delivered excellently, in terms of that objective. So there is there is a good interrelationship and continuity between today and tomorrow. Just key points to take home from today. And again, I think our main speaker landed on these points as he was summing up the discussions. I think the first point is that the complex social challenges that we are confronted with as humanity require transdisciplinary knowledge. They are not going to be solved by one discipline. We truly require an intersection, of disciplines to solve these complex social challenges that we face as a country, as a continent, and as humanity. Therefore, the agenda to bring about socio-economic transformation needs to be pursued by all actors who believe and who stand to benefit from that agenda. And I think the topic of his address was designed exactly to expose, not to just expose, but to help us with thinking in terms of how do we go about persecuting, if you like, that particular agenda, both for the purposes of our benefit as individuals, but most importantly, for purposes of our benefit as the collective, what our speaker calls as commons. The second point that has come out of this session is that the work around the transformation or decolonization of education, particularly the content of our education system, must be deepened, heightened, and we've got to break the cycle of education as an instrument for social reproduction to education becoming an instrument for social transformation. And that can only be done if particularly young people act as conscious beings, if they raise their consciousness, they deal with what the speaker referred to as the attitude of the mind. So the question of conscience and consciousness will therefore be important in ensuring that we are consistent in pursuit of this agenda that has been outlined by our main speaker, and as I've summarized briefly earlier on. The other point, just flowing from this, is that conscious actors or conscientious actors don't ask for permission as social agents. So in other words, as if I were to quote Mr. Nechitenze, in other words, social agency is given, is not claimed. As someone wrote that it's only conditions that are given, but then it is the task of social agents. It is the responsibility of social agents to act in order to alter the conditions in favor, of their own objectives. Again, the point that has been again repeated by Steve, that young people, and I think this is a very important point, young people are not leaders of tomorrow, but they are leaders of today. So I think that's the message that young people must walk away with from this session, that history bestows them a responsibility to lead now and not lead tomorrow. And then the last point I would want to make again is the point that Mr. Nechitenze ended with, that activism must be underpinned by a particular value system. There must be these values that drive our activism. Part of these values, one should be hard work. It should be self-criticism and criticism, ethical conduct, love for knowledge, lifelong learning, as he mentioned, and many, social solidarity, social justice, and many others. And these are the values that have held together those who fought for liberation of the continent, as well as liberation, of our own country. So thank you so much, Mr. Nechitenze, for taking time to be with our young people. We truly thank you for this brilliant presentation, thought-provoking presentation. We've learned a lot, and hopefully next time we call on you to come to the university, we will come here physically. I know you are here in 2018, invited by Krishet. So we hope that you'll come back next time to our university. Thank you so much for this, and thanks to the program director as well, Pedro, for ably facilitating the program. Thanks to our VC for her opening and welcoming remarks. Thanks to the President for his statement of solidarity and support to this convention. We will, unfortunately, we can't Zoom, we can't send via Zoom the present. That's the disadvantage of the gift. That's the disadvantage of utilizing technology. But we'll find ways of ensuring that the gift gets to Johannesburg. And thanks so much to all the participants to this to the first day of our convention. And as Siv said, this is not the end. This is the end of day one. So we're looking forward to an exciting day as well, an equally exciting day tomorrow. Thank you so much, Program Director.
All right, thank you very much, Dean, for that summation. Just to remind the floor, if you look at the chat box below, there is a link there that will take you to where day 2 will be happening tomorrow. So make sure that you copy that link with you, and also do ensure that you spread the invitation so that more people also RSVP in order to receive that link officially. Otherwise, yeah, that is all from my side. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a very good afternoon. Keep safe with your families. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.